In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where the morning air was filled with the scent of fresh-cut grass and the hum of lawnmowers, there lived a man named Marcus Davis. He was a man of integrity, discipline, and courage, a U.S. Army soldier recently returned from deployment overseas. After years of serving his country, Marcus had decided to settle in this peaceful community, hoping for a quiet life where he could relax, reconnect with his family, and continue to build a future. But the peacefulness of his new home quickly became overshadowed by something far less welcome: racism. Marcus had moved into a house at the end of a cul-de-sac, nestled between two older homes. On one side, there was the Johnson family, a friendly couple who'd always been kind to him. On the other, however, were the Hargroves, an older couple who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. At first, Marcus noticed subtle things, strange looks when he walked past the Hargroves' house, whispers when he waved hello, and sometimes just an uncomfortable silence when he was around. He chalked it up to small-town quirks, but as weeks went by, the tension grew. One evening, Marcus returned home after a long day of work at a local veterans center. As he pulled into his driveway, he noticed a group of his neighbors gathered outside. They were talking in hushed voices, but as soon as they saw him, their whispers stopped. The Hargroves, particularly, stood with their arms crossed, glaring at him from across the street. It was clear something was brewing as Marcus began unloading groceries from his car. Mr. Hargrove, an elderly man with a stern face and graying hair, walked toward him. His wife, standing on the porch, had a cold look in her eyes. "You know," Mr. Hargrove said with a deliberate tone, "I don't know how things are where you're from, but this neighborhood's been peaceful for years. We don't need people like you bringing trouble here." Marcus paused, surprised at the sudden hostility. "Excuse me, Mr. Hargrove," he replied, keeping his voice calm. Though his blood began to simmer. "You heard me," Mr. Hargrove continued, stepping closer, his words edged with spite. "We've never had someone like you living here. What exactly do you think you're doing, moving into a quiet neighborhood like this?" The air grew tense. Marcus looked around at the few other neighbors who had gathered, clearly waiting for some sort of confrontation. He knew what they were thinking. The look on their faces said it all. They expected him to back down, to feel small, but Marcus wasn't the same man who had been pushed around in his youth. He had fought for his country, and he had learned to stand tall, no matter the circumstances. He took a deep breath and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out something that would make all the difference. He pulled out his U.S. Army badge, holding it up where everyone could see. The shine of it reflected in the fading sunlight, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. "I don't know what you think you know about me," Marcus began, his voice steady and strong, "but I served this country to protect people like you. I fought for the freedoms we all enjoy, including the freedom for you to hold your prejudices. But make no mistake, your words, your hate, won't intimidate me." Mr. Hargrove's face flushed with embarrassment. The others on the street, including Mrs. Hargrove, stood in stunned silence, their jaws slack as they processed the realization of who Marcus was. The badge he held was not just a symbol of military service. It was a declaration of the honor he carried with him, something they couldn't possibly dismiss. "I don't care if you don't like me living here," Marcus continued, "but understand this. You will treat me with respect, just like you would any other person. And if you can't do that, I'll make sure you learn the consequences of discrimination." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The weight of Marcus's words hung in the air. Mr. Hargrove opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes flickered between the badge and Marcus's unwavering gaze, and for the first time he seemed unsure of himself. Finally, he muttered, "I didn't know." "I'm sure you didn't," Marcus replied. "But now you do." With that, Marcus turned and walked back to his house, leaving the Hargroves and the rest of the neighbors in stunned silence. No one dared to speak, and as Marcus closed his door behind him, he knew that he had not only stood up for himself, but for anyone who would ever be made to feel less than they were. Because of the color of their skin, the next few weeks in the neighborhood were noticeably quieter. The Hargroves no longer made their rude remarks, and the others who had once whispered behind his back began to treat him with the respect he had earned. Even Mr. Hargrove, who had once been so cold, would nod politely whenever they passed each other. Marcus had won more than just a quiet neighborhood. He had made a stand for dignity, honor, and respect, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone that courage and integrity could defeat the deepest prejudices. And from that day on, the Hargroves and everyone in that neighborhood learned one simple truth. Marcus Davis wasn't just any man. He was a soldier, and soldiers don't back down.